Yes, we are
Okay,
recording. Thank
so
you
I
so
will
much.
call this meeting of the Land Use Development Team Oversight Committee to order, the January 27th meeting. Apologies, I'm having technical difficulties, so I will be only joining by audio. And can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you so much. Calling roll here. We have Chair Friedman.
Here.
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Here.
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we are all here. So on item 2, preliminary matters, are there any announcements that any of my colleagues have or from staff?
Good morning, Chair Friedman. Rebecca Bjork, Interim Community Development Director. I'm very pleased to announce that we have an interim Chief Building Official, and her name is Christina Dye. She goes by Tina, and she will be joining us this morning.
Great. Well, welcome. This is great news and pleasure to have you on today's meeting. Any other announcements, Ms. Bjork or members of staff?
No other announcements. Thank you.
Okay, hearing none. We'll move on to item B, and approval of the minutes from October 28th, 2020. Have my colleagues had a chance to read them? And if so, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll second.
So we have a motion by Councilmember Gutierrez and a second by Councilmember Jordan. May I get a roll call, please?
Yes, we have Councilmember Gutierrez.
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan.
Aye.
Chair
Get
Friedman.
2 yeses on yes, and Michael Jordan gets 2 yeses on that one, it looks like.
Yes. Somehow he snuck in while the trash was being taken out, so I have the duty.
All right. So we are on to item C, which is public comment for items not on the agenda today. Do I have, are there any members of the public that are wishing to speak? I don't see any.
Yeah, sorry. We do not have any members of the public who have raised hand requesting to speak. If there is anyone who would like to speak, use the raise your hand function, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak after I call on you. And I do not see anyone requesting to speak.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Walters. I will close public comment. So now we are on to agenda items 3A, which is an update on the process improvements. And I will turn that over to Ms. Bjork. And by the way, congratulations on your new position at the city as the Deputy City Administrator. I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you in this role, but also in your new role. Very excited to have you as part of the executive team.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored and looking forward to that new responsibility. So we just wanted to have this slide for those who may not have joined us in the past to revisit the scope and purpose of this committee, which is to advise the land development team, staff, and oversee the implementation of process improvements and related issues recommended by the NOVAC Consulting Group. And the primary efforts that we are undertaking are trying to simplify and streamline the land development process. Next slide, please. So we are, the things that we have accomplished to date are finalizing the mission statement and finalizing the vision statement. We are trying to model and live these as we go about our work. Next slide, please. And then I would like to ask Ms. Dye to join me. As at our last meeting, we did introduce this item to you, but she's going to give you a brief update on where we are with the on-demand permits.
Good morning, Chair and Council. The on-demand permits are now live for simple over-the-counter type permits for reroofs, water heater replacement, furnace replacement, electrical panels, and most recently, small photovoltaic type permits. We are still working on developing a link to be more accessible, easier accessible to the public, and the inspection process handles code compliance portion. That's all.
Thank you. Next slide, please.
Can I just ask a question before you
Yes.
go on? So I'm just curious with the discussion we had a couple weeks ago on the moving forward on adoption of the REACH ordinance and the reliance on electrical. I have absolutely zero knowledge of the process for residential solar, and if that's a painless application, you can just come in and do you have solar by right? Does it work? Or does it have to go to a design board? Or can you tell me about that last bullet and how we handle solar on residences?
Sure. There are state guidelines that require jurisdictions to expedite the review process and inspection process for small PV systems that meet certain criteria. So that's what this offers.
What is an example of small? Is it square footage or?
No, it's number of panels, height, a minimum of no more than 10 kWA. And we are offering storage systems as a part of this. That's not part of the state requirement.
Okay. I'd love to get a handout sheet or something on that. If you just had something simple that I'm sure you guys do, if you could just send it that way and I could put it in my REACH folder to worry about down the road on how we're coordinating REACH goals with easy access to meeting local sustainability responsibility. Thanks.
Okay, next slide, please. This time I'm going to turn the meeting over to Ms. Brooke, the city planner, to talk about the process improvements we're working on in the planning portion of the department.
Good morning, Chair Friedman and council members Gutierrez and Jordan. So we discussed this topic at your last meeting. I just want to give you a quick update in terms of creating staff reports, written reports for design review boards. We checked in with the chairs of our boards and commissions, and based on their feedback, we plan and we will be preparing staff reports for just certain projects, maybe unique projects they don't see very often and they might need a reminder of some of the issues to consider, the findings that they'll need to make, or very complex projects where we need to give them some advance information ahead of their meeting. So we're working through that. It'll be iterative and we'll learn from that experience and their requests, and we'll continue to provide those written reports when asked. And then moving on to the bulk of the rest of the presentation is about process, clarity, and consistency. This is just one recommendation of the NOVAC group, but it's quite a big one. So we'll be talking about that for the remainder of the morning. I did want to let you know, if you didn't already see the land development team bulletin that went out in December, we have updated our planning application forms and created some informational guides that are on our website now, and are updating our planning application process to clearly define the starting point for a planning application. These are discretionary applications, so putting aside for a moment building permit applications, we're talking about projects that require some type of discretion or public hearing at a decision maker. I'm going to hand it off to this wonderful video that we have posted on our website that can explain this improvement in just a mere 3 minutes. So let me go ahead and do that. And bear with me for a moment here. Okay, so hopefully that helped explain a little bit in a very succinct manner. I did want to point out, and I'm happy to take any questions on this particular part of the presentation, because after this, I'm going to get into some specific process improvement or ways that we can streamline the project review process. This launch on December 10th of the single planning application also set in place clearly defining a starting point for projects, because prior to that, applicants were kind of able to choose their own adventure. They would maybe submit initially for design concept review, maybe a pre-application, maybe straight into our development review process. And so now we're able to control how applications proceed through the process, and then also give staff an opportunity to review the projects more thoroughly up front, because we were finding that projects would get too far along in the process before staff was able to thoroughly review them and perhaps catch some areas that didn't comply with the code. So we're really hoping that this process, clarifying that, will make it easier for everybody. So moving ahead into the rest of the presentation, which really focuses on this one recommendation. It gets at the heart of the NOVAC group's recommendations and their entire review of the land development team process.
Pardon the interruption. Ms. Brooke, we cannot see the PowerPoint display, so if you want to put that back up, that would be great.
I'm so sorry.
No worries. Thank you.
It was showing. Okay, I apologize. I needed to click that again. Okay. So yes, moving ahead into this next recommendation of the NOVAC group to continue on with process clarity and consistency. And I want to point out that through the remainder of the slides, I'll be presenting to you those changes to our project review process that require some action by City Council. So we continually make improvements to our process when we can, procedures or administrative policies when we can that don't require council action. These next recommendations are either municipal code ordinance amendments or guideline amendments that require council action. And so you're getting an early preview of some ideas that we've gathered through both staff's recommendations and NOVAC group's findings going forward. So the project review steps I've categorized them into these 6 basic categories that a project review goes through: the pre-application process, the design review process, environmental review, public hearings in general, and then the appeal process, and then permit plan check. And so I'll be highlighting those for you as I go through. So starting with pre-application, we'd like to make pre-application review team submittals and concept reviews at the design board and planning commission completely optional for all projects. Right now, there are certain projects, more complex projects that require, the code right now requires a PRT application for some projects, and a concept review at the design review boards is noted as the first step for all projects, most projects, and we want to make those optional. So although we believe that there's great value in these pre-application services, we'd like to leave it up to the applicant to avail themselves of those services if they'd like to, but if they don't believe they need to, then they could proceed to just filing the formal development application. Now moving on to design review. This is big, and this may be these are the recommendations that may take us the longest to implement, but they also have the biggest impact to projects. One suggestion is to reduce the triggers for design review. So, we have 3 different design review boards: Architectural Board of Review, Historic Landmarks Commission, and Single Family Design Board, and they all have different project types, thresholds or triggers that require them to go to the design boards. We'd like to reevaluate those, of course, through the public process and discussion with decision makers and stakeholders, and see if there's areas where we can reduce some of these projects not needing design review at all. And then following down from there, if projects do require design review, we'd like to suggest that perhaps the scope of review by the design boards is narrowed so that they might only look at that portion of the project that actually triggered design review, whereas now, once a project triggers design review, the whole project is up for review. And then thirdly, once we narrow the list of projects that are subject to design review, we'd like to expand the list of projects that can be approved by staff. We have quite a few, and these are listed in the guidelines for each of the design boards. They're well known in advance what types of projects can qualify for staff review versus having to go to a public hearing. And in fact, one of the new informational guides we have on our website helps applicants identify those types of projects early on, so they know if they might be able to just tweak their project design slightly, they could get staff review instead of discretionary hearing. And then continuing on with more design review suggestions, there are, through state law, a limit of 5 public hearings for housing projects. We'd like to consider that perhaps some type of limit of public hearings should be placed on all types of projects. And then minor zoning exceptions, right now most of them are within the purview of the design boards. So a couple of years ago, we downgraded some zoning exceptions from needing an actual modification, a zoning modification that would go to the staff hearing officer or the planning commission. We downgraded some of those to allow the design boards to take an action on those. But we're finding that in some cases, if the project has to go to planning commission or staff hearing officer anyway for some other aspect of the project, we could just take that minor zoning exception to them too as the land use and zoning review bodies, and then they could do that all in one hearing. Something I believe you are aware of, our historic resources ordinance has been a work effort we've been working off and on this effort for several years. We are finally taking it through the public hearing process. We're all very excited about it. And I mention it here as a process improvement because it not only updates and modernizes the language and organizes the ordinance better, but it also streamlines the process to designate historic resources. So that's saving staff time and saving HLC time to do that. It also establishes a process for our architectural historian to approve minor alterations to historic resources. It would establish a clear process to nominate and designate historic districts, where right now we have some areas of town that are potential historic districts, and there's confusion about what does it mean if I'm making a change to a property within this potential district. So making it very clear what happens within and outside the districts, and then clarifies and modernizes terms. So this ordinance has been to the Planning Commission and is tentatively scheduled for Ordinance Committee February 23rd. So it should be making its way through to Council hopefully soon after. So we're very excited about that. And then moving into the environmental review phase of projects, we have a master environmental assessment that city staff use to guide our environmental review process. It's pretty out of date. We need to update it anyway. And if we are going to take that on, there's some opportunities to streamline some of the project review process within that. So right now, if an archaeological report is required for the ground disturbance associated with a project, that's prepared by a professional consultant, reviewed by staff to make sure that it meets all the contents that's required to be in those reports. And then they go to the Historic Landmarks Commission for acceptance. And we think that we can still have the same quality control on these reports and making sure they're complying with the California Environmental Quality Act without needing that HLC step. And that could save several weeks in a project's process. Similarly, there are some historic structures and sites reports that we believe that the city's architectural historian could prepare versus having the applicant hire a private consultant to do that. So we'd like to consider that. And then just generally adopting more clear-cut thresholds to streamline the review of technical reports, letting applicants know in advance that, you know, if you have these types of impacts or removing these types of trees or this many trees, you will need an arborist report or you need a biologist report, and just making that much more clear for everybody. Oops. Okay, and then moving on into public hearings. So council members, you're probably aware of within the code, we talk about projects that are community benefit projects. So community benefit housing projects are described in the municipal code, and it's very clear based on this list of 4 types of housing projects that qualify that we know that those types of projects can potentially ask for an increase in building height. The same is not true for anything that's not a housing project. That definition of being a community benefit project must be confirmed by City Council. There's types of projects that can qualify for that, like public, I'm forgetting the term right now, but I know the Museum of Art was able to qualify as a community benefit project when they needed to add square footage. They were doing an addition, but it wasn't listed out very explicitly. So it had to go to City Council, get designated as a community benefit project, get allocated square footage from our growth management program, and then go to a separate planning commission hearing to be able to exceed the 45-foot height limit. So there's multi-step processes. We want to try to make that more streamlined by having objective criteria laid out in the code that these projects are just designated community benefit, don't need a separate hearing by council. And then similarly, community benefit projects can request to go above the 45 or 48-foot height limit downtown, potentially up to 60 feet. Right now, that's a separate hearing at the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission needs to make certain findings to allow those projects. We'd like to be able to make that more certain for certain types of projects. If we can identify those projects in advance, then we'd like to be able to prevent that extra hearing and appealable action for the project.
Ms. Brooke, I have a question on that.
Certainly.
I understand the 45 to the 48. So we're trying to expand the types of projects so they wouldn't have to come to the for hearings and ultimately council. But to go to 60 feet is what you just said. Would that basically not have any appealable, or it wouldn't come to council?
Chair Friedman, so the thought at this point would be to have some criteria in the municipal code. You know, we would have established height limits as we do in certain parts of town, whether it's 45 feet or 60 feet. And that if it's in an area where the maximum of 60 feet could be achieved, our vision is that we would have a list of certain projects, like a housing project that's providing at least 50% affordable housing. I'm just throwing that number out there, but that it would be very measurable and known that they could at least propose something above 45 feet. And then it would still go through the discretionary review process for the building design, but it would eliminate the separate hearing for Planning Commission to just give them the authorization to continue to proceed at that height. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then because we're eliminated at that point, there wouldn't be an appeal to council, because right now the Planning Commission do it and it could get appealed to council. Is that right?
Correct. Right. Correct.
So there wouldn't be a Planning Commission discussion on it or hearing on it, and then so then by default, I guess it wouldn't come to council either. I'll just hold my comments for that. I just want to understand that point. Thank you.
Sure, right. And understand these are ideas. So we know that they will be fleshed out as they go through review process. And it looks like Councilmember Jordan might have a question.
So Ms. Brooke, I just want to, so the goal of that would be we'd find some low-hanging agreeable method to set the objective criteria, and then everybody can play with that. But if you couldn't meet that criteria, you'd still have the option of going through what would be the old process, right? That you just can't
Right.
meet the criteria. Now you got to go in front of the process and sell it, right?
Right,
Okay.
right. And I should say the overarching goal with a lot of these suggestions that I've covered already is to try to make more of these things objective so that everybody knows the rules that we're playing by from the get-go, but understand there's always been exceptions. There's always been a relief valve for people, whether it's modifications or some other avenue to go down if they want to deviate from what's codified.
Very good.
Okay, so still in the public hearings realm, so this is very staff administrative detailed bullet here, but right now the code requires that at the first public hearing for a project, and that might be a concept review at one of the design boards, the notice needs to include all the applications required for this project. And as I mentioned early on, given our past practices, projects might go to concept review pretty early on before staff has had a chance to review the project very thoroughly. And so we and the applicant might not be aware that it needs a zoning modification, and it will have gone through the first public hearing without that on its notice. And then we need to send it back. Back to the hearing, back with a new notice, because a modification was identified sometime later down in the review process. And this has caused this circular redundancy in hearings and renoticing projects for that. So we do believe that changing our process and doing a more thorough review at the outset of application submittal should help this. We'd also like to try to streamline this through the code as well, and not have to have these projects go backwards through the process if additional applications are identified down the road, or as the project design changes and something about it, the application types might change along the way. And then again, something in our code, we went above and beyond the government code requirement for when we make ordinance amendments. The government code requires display ads to be published at the Planning Commission and City Council hearings. We inadvertently said that it should be published at every hearing, and so we're publishing display ads for ordinance committee meetings as well, which adds time and cost to the any projects or work efforts that require ordinance amendments. Boop. Okay, and then just one more thing here on the public hearing. So as the state law is written regarding accessory dwelling units, and as it relates to the Coastal Act, if someone is converting or building a detached accessory dwelling unit within the coastal zone, it requires a coastal development permit. It's a pretty streamlined process at the public hearing stage of that. We do the typical staff review that we would do for a project of that sort, and then it's announced to the staff hearing officer that the coastal development permit was approved basically by staff. We'd like to find a way to streamline that, whether it's adding a coastal exclusion category to our code or otherwise streamlining that process so that these can occur more quickly, just to facilitate the ADUs in the coastal zone a little more quickly. And then in the realm of appeals. So right now at the design review boards, there are two actions that they take for most projects that are appealable. So project might go through concept review, get to the critical stage of receiving project design approval. That's really the significant decision for design review projects. That's appealable to City Council. And then later, after the project has been more fully developed and they return to the design board for final approval, which is largely landscape details and materials and colors and lighting, that action is appealable as well. And there have been times when we have had people appeal both of those actions. And I know council is aware of these. You've seen a couple of these projects come to you twice on appeal. So we'd like to reduce the number of appealable design review actions. This might be a longer term change to our process to really focus one action of the design review boards being appealable, and then perhaps the subsequent actions being administrative. And then maybe a seemingly small thing, we'd like to allow applicants to submit the building permit application before the appeal period has run out on discretionary actions. Of course, we wouldn't be able to approve or issue the permit. Right now, the applicant is not able to submit to the building counter until the 10-day appeal period has run out on the last discretionary action. Again, it might seem minor, but if we can catch some of that time, the 10 days likely is absorbed by our review of the plans anyway. If we can do those concurrently, it would save some time. And then last, on the permit plan check phase of project, one of the recommendations of the NOVAC group was to reduce the staff scope of plan review for discretionary projects. There are two titles within the municipal code that refer to any known code violations or discovered code violations during the plan review process need to be abated before we can accept the application. We are modifying that language to say that the violation can be addressed as part of the project, whether it's at the outset or as a condition of approval. We've worked on that language and it's scheduled, that code change is scheduled for Planning Commission consideration on February 4th. So I'm happy to report that that one is moving ahead. And I just did want to say at closing before we get to committee questions, as I mentioned, we're presenting these to you largely because they require City Council action to implement, whether it's code changes or guideline changes, and they will take, some of these will take a fair amount of time to implement. We do hope to group some of them logically and take them in chunks through the process. Our fear being that if we try to do these all at once, there might be one or two issues that bog down the rest of the package. So open to feedback on this, but I think we'd like to group them and try to get some of these incrementally implemented and just start to see incremental improvement to the project review process. And with that, I'll close my presentation and welcome any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Brooke. This is a very thorough presentation. There's a lot of great ideas here. So at this point, I will open it up for questions, and my colleagues, Councilmember Jordan, do you have any questions? I'm kind of flying a little blind here, so I'll just call out, and Councilmember Jordan, you have the floor.
Thanks. First, Ms. Brooke, I want to say this is a great list. This should be every planning commissioner's Christmas list for this year. So you have 11 months.
Christmas list too.
Well, that too. Yeah. So I think I just have one question, and then I just have a couple. I'll just throw some comments at you. All the way back to the second or third one, which was I know a big issue out there in the development world on the narrowing the scope of design review, which I'm just categorizing as scope creep, in our world. You'd obviously be looking for areas that were, well, let me phrase my perception, and then you can tell me. Looking for areas that were around, had worked into the fabric of the adjacent properties or neighborhood, and my real point is they're not not some sort of category that, in my words, again, you would have better words, a health and safety issue, right? Or, for example, an ADA issue. So I know we get a lot of those scope creeps on ADA, but there's a lot of other scope creeps on, there's a 20-year-old fence that's 6 inches too high kind of thing, and nobody in the neighborhood is complaining. Is that kind of the gist of how you're thinking, or I'm reading that?
Councilmember Jordan, it could be. It's a very general statement, narrowing the scope of design review, but I think that's why we need to discuss this further, both with the design boards and with stakeholders and staff, is how do we still honor the design review process? If we decide on these updated triggers for design review, you know, and here's a project that still meets one of those triggers, how do we define the scope? It will take time, and it will take adjusting to that for sure. But it might be, you know, this is the second story addition that triggered the single family design board review. The fence is not in your purview. You know, that's just a suggestion. And
That's just, yeah, same thing. Right? I thought I got away from this. So.
Oh, please. You missed me. Chair Friedman and Councilmember Jordan, I just wanted to point out, as we look at limiting design review purview or the scope, just to point out that our charter does require that exterior alterations of that require a building permit have to go to the ABR and HLC. So while we can limit by code amendments, the scope within that purview of, say, I think Ms. Brooks mentioned, okay, well, you're changing, you know, out 5 windows and a porch. So, okay, you only get to look at that area as opposed to taking in the whole building as a whole. We can do that through code, but we can't entirely exclude the design boards unless we do a charter amendment. So I just wanted to keep that, have you keep that in the back of your minds.
Okay, I think the bigger, in my experience, the bigger complaint is not the trigger itself, it's the trigger, and then everybody starts looking around 180 degrees and looking at other things that weren't the trigger. So, so I really like this list. I'm really excited. I'm so excited. I'm really not excited that some of them will take time and money and time and outreach. A couple things I'd encourage you to do in your packaging, and that is you have plenty of history on what the issues are and the feedback you get from the building community. And I would encourage you to not just go do the easy ones quickly that have no impact, but really look to group the ones that will have the greatest beneficial impact to the customer and try and get on those. And what resonated to me was just 7 of them, and that's the triggers, but okay. And then the narrowing the scope and expanding the list of projects that qualify for administrative approval, ADUs in the coastal, just continuing to make that as easy as possible. Remove the redundant opportunity for appeals, you know, the 2 that could happen. Gaining that 10 days back during appeal period to get it, if staff is ready to work on it, able to work on it, why are we waiting 10 days? And then I think that's it. But those all really, from my experience, those really resonated with me as getting its lion's share's worth of bad reviews from the city customer or boards or commissions customer dynamic. And I think there's a big list, but it's a great list. And I think this is exactly what we were asked to do as part of the NOVAC results and work for this. And I can't offer you all the help you need and all the support you need to do what I can. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member Jordan. Council Member Gutierrez, do you have questions?
No questions at this moment. Thank you.
Okay. I don't have any questions at this point, Ms. Brooks. So what I'm going to do is open it up to public comment for this item right now before we go into deliberative comments. So,
Councilmember Friedman, we have a couple more items on here before we close the entire presentation.
oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was in. So I don't have any questions at this point. So I will continue on the presentation then.
Thank you. Ms. Brooke, can you take us back a slide? So we will be coming back to you. We have a meeting agendized for next month. And Ms. Dye will be coming and talking about her observations of the permit review, the plan check review, and the inspection review, and presenting to you her findings from evaluation of that. After that, we do not have meetings scheduled, and we would like to talk to the committee about going to a bi-monthly approach. That will give us more time to get more progress between our meetings so that we are not taking up your time with small improvements, but hopefully have more meaningful feedback for you. So those are my two final closing items. So with that, we would go to public comment. Thank you.
Okay, so let's open up public comment at this point for this. And Ms. Walters, is there anybody who online for public comment?
I'm looking through the panel now. No, there are no raised hands for public comment.
Okay, so seeing that there are no raised hands, I will close public comment. And at this time, I'll open up Councilmember Gutierrez. If you have any comments or questions, Councilmember Jordan already made some comments, so you have the floor if you would like to make comments or questions.
I just want to thank staff for their commitment and all of their hard work. This presentation really makes me really happy because not only does it show to the community how much we want to improve, and we are paying attention to the NOVAC report, but it also confirms the level of commitment of our staff. And I just want to thank you all. It's been a very tough year with a lot of changes, and thank you so much for all your hard work.
And could you speak to if you're supportive of going after next month's meeting, going to a bi-monthly meeting?
Yes.
Just part of that. Okay, thank you. So I too want to thank our staff, all that you're doing, and I think we have really made some progress in a lot of these. As we look at them, you're able to implement them at the staff level and just giving us a briefing of what's coming at council. I do like the approach of grouping kind of similar type of items. I think Councilmember Jordan made a good comment that rather than trying to pick the low-hanging fruit, we can group some of that with some higher items that can get an impact at a greater pace. So the two things I would just note is that the one item, I think the items that Councilmember Jordan actually pointed out, I'm fully supportive of moving those forward and having those community discussions. I think he listed some of the ones that were on my list. But in terms of limiting the number of hearings for all projects, I'd like to understand that more when it comes back, because there are some issues with that. It's come up in council before with the housing projects and I know in our past that we have applicants that come in and they don't complete it, or staff gives them that direction and they come back and then the second hearing they haven't taken and incorporated that. So I just want to make sure we're addressing that. The other one is the 60-foot issue. I do like having the objective criteria, but I would just caution, tread lightly on that and make sure that we're doing the proper community outreach and maybe above and beyond, because once we start going to heights up to 60 feet, that's when we can have a real divide in our community. So that's one. It's just make sure that we're outreaching maybe above and beyond what we normally would on that particular issue. But other than that, I don't have any other comments. I think you're on a great track, and there's a lot of great ideas here. And I thank you for your time. And Councilmember Jordan, I see you're back up. Do you have any closing comments?
I kind of jumped the gun on my comments before. So I'm okay with bi-monthly also, but I would caution us that this list, as Ms. Brooks said, is a ton of work, and that maybe we make sure that we're messaging somewhere on the LDT website or whatever that here's kind of the scope where we're at in working on, and put some language on there that it's in process, it's a lot of work, that kind of thing. So I don't want the message of a bi-monthly meeting indicate that this is slowing down or nobody's doing anything. So I'd have a suggestion there. And then Ms. Brooke, could I see a second again? I wanted to ask you just another conceptual question. This reach thing bothers me. So I'm drawing an analogy to how we got to Novak, and I'm worried about the REACH thing leading to another Novak situation in a year or two. So we'll go through the REACH process, and by the end of the year, we'll be starting to convert things to electrical only. And my concern is that a year or two after that, what we find out is that we made the change to the REACH requirements, but internally we did not have the structure there to allow easy permitting, easy processing for not small solar voltaic and reasonable amounts of storage at the home level. The goals of the environment, I understand the environmental goals of the REACH, but the on the ground goals of the REACH should be to accelerate and incentivize me having solar that runs my house, me having storage for when there is no electricity, and kind of these there's words for it, these small sustainable pods around the city, or a bigger sustainable city by itself. And I'm just kind of concerned that could this be an item that's kind of like added to the Novak process to make sure that we're lining up with that policy that's coming?
I think Ms. Bjork might want to add on here. I'll just start off by saying, so the small solar photovoltaic example that we presented to you earlier this morning was an example of an on-demand permit. So if it meets the criteria of single family or duplex residential within what Ms. Dye said, that's on-demand permit. So the applicant goes through the checklist online. If they can meet all those criteria, it's like a no-touch permit. The permit gets issued automatically to them. So there is still the second stage of, okay, maybe my system is larger than that, and I need to go through the regular permit system. And then this is where Ms. Bjork or Ms. Dye might be able to jump in and help me out with all the expediting that's already in place for regular, slightly larger PV systems.
Yeah, I want to jump in and say that at the staff level, we are having some conversations about the scope of the REACH code and what does it apply to. And one of the reasons for going with a very, the initial proposal of strictly all electric is that it actually simplifies the review at the building permit level. But I think we're recognizing that there very may need to be exclusions or exemptions for projects for which all electric just doesn't work. And I think those would be the more complicated, bigger commercial industrial projects rather than the single family homes. So we still have a lot of conversation to do around REACH code, but we will keep your comments in mind with regard to that.
Yeah, kind of personally, I'm less concerned about who gets excluded or not, but I'm concerned at this point in time with our ability to incentivize people who can generate more electricity than they need, so they can run it back to Edison on the tariff thing, or they can generate more electricity than they need so they can put it into storage. And whether we get that from a process level that's coming, and we don't look up and we're 2 years into REACH, and then we find out that we're back to kind of a Novak relationship where our processes aren't supporting our goals. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's a good thing to be thinking of and keeping track of as we go forward with the REACH code. I will say that the sustainability and resilience staff are working closely with the planning staff and the building and safety staff as they try to develop that proposal for council.
Very good. Sorry to go off on a tangent. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
No, great questions, and I think it's important that we do that. So I'll say that I neglected myself, that I am supportive of going to the bi-monthly. I would just say that we do want to try to get the word out and make sure that we have the momentum, such as using the city newsletter for updates or other types of things that we can get out there. And if you think it's warranted, Ms. Bjork, I would say maybe sending, if there's anything that comes up that we should be aware of, the committee members, just sending us a memo or something like these are items that are coming forward that maybe they're going to be coming to ordinance or they're in a certain place, like some of these higher profile items, so we're aware of them, or if there's public meetings that you're having on some of them as we start moving them out there, just sending us some, not like in the off month or something like that, just to keep us apprised of anything you think we should know about. But other than that, I thank you for all the work that you and our staff are doing. Welcome you, Ms. Dye, and glad to have you on board. And is there anything else that we, when is the next meeting so that we all know for the public?
Ms. Walters, do you have that readily available?
Yes, I believe the next meeting is scheduled for February 24th, the fourth Wednesday in February, 10 a.m.
So is there anything further, Ms. Bjork, that you have?
Chair Friedman, no, there's nothing further from me. Thank you.
Okay. So with that, we will adjourn this meeting and we'll be back in session on February 24th. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.